Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. Very happy to welcome you all for this special edition of UNLIA webinars that we are organizing together with the Legal ID team and the Rule of Law team. Without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Revai Markanje Albeck, our Senior Justice and Security Advisor, and to Risa Arai, our Program Specialist of Legal Identity, to introduce us to the reasons for this joint webinar that seeks to look at the linkages between legal ID and access to justice. Revai, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, colleagues. And on behalf of the joint team, which is the UNDP governance team, the team that works on legal identity, as well as the UNDP team on rule of law, security and human rights. I'm really delighted to see so many of you online for this very important discussion and exchange of knowledge and experiences on the linkages between access to justice and access to legal identity. I think I'll just go back a little bit into the normative framework just to frame our conversation today and say, as many of you already know, Article 6 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights really says that everyone has the right to legal identity. And yet we all know that in many contexts, this is often very difficult to obtain. Legal identity, as we know, in most instances, is also linked to the provision of goods and services for effective participation and engagement in social, political, and economic life. So what it does mean is that if you don't have that legal identity, you are excluded or you are unable to exercise your rights and to engage in many aspects of life, including the aspects around access to justice. Legal identity, as much as it is an issue of improving administration and bureaucratic effectiveness, it is also a rights-based issue of access to justice. As many of you may know, those who have worked on rule of law, on justice, legal empowerment explicitly recognizes the role of legal identity to ensuring that access to justice and rule of law do happen and function. So in relation to access to justice, there are two interlinked components. I'll just touch on them very briefly. I know Risa will expand on this a little bit later, which are number one, that the provision of justice support services is important to enable those without legal ID to obtain the legal ID. So access to legal aid becomes a critical and important part of enabling those without ID. In most instances, they have to litigate, they have to go through the legal system in order to be able to obtain legal IDs. And conversely, the provision of support to those without legal ID so that they can access justice means that there has to be an engagement in legal processes, especially informal justice processes. When you do engage, identifiable juristic person is one of the conditions in some of the jurisdictions that we work in. Therefore, the importance of the link between access to justice and legal identity was also particularly amplified and brought to the fore during the COVID-19 pandemic. As the Independent Evaluation Office observed during the access to justice evaluation of UNDP, the cost of limited access to justice was particularly high during this period for those who were exposed to vulnerabilities, in particular also to those without legal identity. And the evaluation did find through the whole process of interviewing different respondents, talking to different country offices, that people without legal identity were among the least supported vulnerable group by UNDP when it comes to access to legal aid. So one of the recommendations coming out of this process was that UNDP really needs to expand its support and work and reduce the justice gap for those without legal tools such as legal identity. So colleagues, dear friends, today the webinar we are having is really one of those efforts through this cross-team collaboration for us to raise awareness within UNDP and also to identify entry points to support people without legal identity. And as well as today's focus is really about sharing some of the good experiences, the good practices, and the lessons learned that are coming from our UNDP country offices. And I'm truly grateful to the colleagues that are online today and that are going to speak to this particular issue. Lastly, I want to just mention, before I spoke briefly about the work that we do in the rule of law team, that legal identity and its link to access to justice is particularly key, right? In this global world where we are facing numerous global crises, fragility, conflicts, natural disasters that are rampant every day. Displaced persons, refugees, IDPs, are often at their most vulnerable, and they do require support to enforce rights and to access services. And in most instances, when they are on the move and when they are displaced, often they may not have the legal identity. So the discussion today is critically important, really, for all of us when making these linkages, exploring these entry points, and expanding the level of support, really, that UNDP can provide. So before I end, I'll just speak very briefly, because I know it's a cross-team collaboration. I'll speak very briefly to the work that we do within the rule of law team and our work, which is really anchored within the Justice Features core lab. As some of you may know, but maybe some don't, the Justice Features core lab was launched in 2022, and it is anchored within the UNDP Global Program for the Rule of Law, Human Rights, Justice and Security, and it is facilitated by the UNDP Global Justice team that is based in New York, and soon we'll also be having team members that will also be based in The Hague. The Justice Core Lab itself is really a space and a way of working, both virtually and in person, and it really aims to convene a diverse range of persons, like colleagues we on the call today, expertise and perspectives to explore and experiment and co-create solutions to some of the world's most complex justice and development issues. And in this particular case, when we look at this intersection of legal identity and access to justice, I think it's really one of those topics that even when you go into literature, not much is written about it, not much is explored around it. And I think we do have an opportunity through the work we are implementing in different country offices, which is going to be shared today, and others, to begin to bring those linkages and strengthen our service provision in that particular area. So within the Justice Core Lab itself, it is really a learning space. It is about evidence-driven and a strong focus on data, on analysis. It is about experimenting too. And in many ways, it is also, of course, about generating those particular solutions to the challenges. And in terms of how the Justice Core Lab works, it is really about constantly scanning the justice space and scanning what are those challenges and what are the opportunities too that are in the space. And interestingly, and also importantly, it is also about communicating those ideas, the knowledge, the lessons, but it is also about questioning, right? What can and should be done to tackle some of these specific justice-related issues. It is sometimes also about testing the solutions. We know in most instances, it's not necessarily easy to find solutions, but sometimes the process of testing solutions, a process of adapting those emerging solutions, often then lead us to a very important and definitive development intervention. The knowledge and the learning that results from these processes really feeds back into our programming processes within the UNDP and within, of course, the justice team, and functioning not only in the headquarters, but with our regional colleagues as well as our country colleagues too. So this is really a quick snapshot of the work that are priorities for UNDP across the justice sector, and it speaks really across at headquarters level with a lot of policy that is really part of the driving force of this work, a lot of programming together with regional colleagues, and a lot of country programming level, which is really done at country level. So the justice features collab itself really responds to all these long-term standing justice challenges, some of the barriers that we see on different matters, be it on access to justice, both criminal, customary, and informal justice, civil justice issues around impunity and discriminatory legal frameworks. It also is really also about some of the work that we do on constitution assistance to different jurisdictions and contexts, digitalization and e-justice, which has expanded significantly since COVID-19, environmental justice, critically important and taking a lot of strides in terms of moving our work in this regard, both in context, conflict, crisis context, transitional justice, critically important, and so is the gender justice work. And I'll be happy to share also, Risa and Lara, at the end, also these bullet points that are in the presentation. I'll stop here for now and hand over to Risa to take us through some of those details on legal identity as well as the intersection with access to justice. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Reba, for a very comprehensive introduction on our linkage between legal identity and the justice sector. I am going to touch base briefly on what we are doing around the legal identity work, the importance of the court and justice sector, as well as our interlinkage in terms of programming with other colleagues from country offices today are going to speak after me. So first of all, some of your colleagues may not know or familiar yet what exactly the legal identity means. So legal identity is the basic characteristics of an individual's identity conferred through the registration by an authorized civil registration authority. So if the parents do not register their children when they were born, those children will have a problem in terms of accessing to any public and private services because of the lack of identity documents. And also there are people like IDP refugees, they lose their identity documents. And then in many cases now we see that, those civil registration records are managed by paper-based. Those paper were washed away by the disaster or insects are eating out. And then sometimes they really do have difficulty in retrieving those documents. So those people who do not have any means of prove who they are, the UN legal identity agenda usually support those individuals, and then also by strengthening the CRVS and the national ID management system to ensure that everyone has a legal identity. So our approach is to make sure that identity documents are issued at the birth and it retires at the death, whether it is CRVS or the national ID system. And then just to one quick more definition, what does it mean by the proof of legal identity? It is a credential, which is usually issued by birth, but either birth certificate or identity card, which are issued maybe when one turns into specified age by the government, usually 16, 18, sometimes it's 5 even, or digital ID credentials, which is a digital version of the legal identity that are recognized as proof of legal identity under the national law. So in often case where there are no robust civil registration system, like voter ID can be recognized as a legal identity if the government decides that way through legal means. So basically that is what legal identity is. And United Nations, not only UNGP, but UN Legal Identity Agenda Task Force has 16 UN agencies, and the UN DESA team, they have this normative framework on how civil registration and vital statistics and identity management should be managed by the government. So as I said, it's a comprehensive from birth to death. And then all of the different parts of the identity system should be interlinked. So for example, either, ideally, either the voter registration or tax or driver's license, all of those data should be sourced from civil registration because that will guarantee one single source of the truth. And if you look at this entire ecosystem, you realize that the court provides, court serves a very important function. Here it says divorce, annulment, judicial separation, adoption, legitimation, and recognition. But for example, last week we had a very important discussion during the CSW around child marriage. So if, in the cases like children do not have any birth certificate, they are forced to get married through customary marriage even when they are children under 18. But if, when they have a birth certificate, the registry or court can stop such process. So it's really important, this like entire legal judicial sector that the service for the rights of the people in terms of the legal identity. And then I remember one anecdotal case. When in New York, I think it was a couple of years ago, and there's a colleague from Brazil today, but there was a woman who came to New York speak about her experiences as a stateless person. So because she didn't have any means to prove who they are, it was really difficult to appeal for the nationality for any country. And she had to write letter to the heads of the state for 192 countries, and then only Brazil replied, and then they changed the law and then granted her nationality and then gave her legal identity. So it was like whole out of the court process and then petition through the letter to heads of state. So, that it really shows that if you don't have any means to prove they are, it's really, really difficult, and you have to do everything you can to gain legal identity. So, this is the like what we are trying to do as a legal identity agenda. This, by the way, that graphic image, and then this approach is approved by the ECOSOC in 2020, if I'm not wrong. So this is like basically the interoperability and then ensure that civil registration ID management system is in compliance with human rights, international human rights law. This is like international standards recommendation. And then on the UNDRIA website, there are a bunch of the documentation that you can see what kind of normative standards we have. And then 16 UN agencies, as I said, works together on this. So now I'd like to move to what would be the intersection between legal identity and access to justice. So we kind of observe that this difficulty in how to have a negative on how people without legal identity can have access to justice, and in the end can get legal identity, because one needs to access to justice to obtain legal identity if they get rejected by the registration authority, for example. But access to justice itself is extremely constrained if you do not have means to prove who they are. So sometimes it's the lack of information on how to claim legal identity when civil registration office said no, because the coordination between civil registry and justice is not working very well. And then normally CRVS is very decentralized. So public officials have difficulties to explain what would be the national process of granting to getting some sort of a certificate. So that's one thing. Sometimes there's a judicial process is like really, really complicated, and you can't even file a case. And also even though you may be able to, or to, with the support from the legal professional, not many people can afford such professional, lawyers to support their cases. So the cost is like too high. And also in the case of Brazil today, Alex is going to speak, is that there's unbalanced power dynamic. So even states have power to detain the population without legal identity. People lack of legal identity do not have ways to claim it because they don't have identity. So there's a power dynamic, and it gives so much power to states, and then citizens really do suffer from the lack of the power to counter against such practice. And also, as I said in the very beginning, there are some cases where proving one's identity is extremely difficult because of lack of the documentations. Even if vital events are registered, there may be lack of the document from the government side because it's paper-based. So those issues are really critical and then needs to be addressed. And then today we are going to hear from the 5 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, and Pakistan, how they overcome those challenges during their programming. But it's either the coordination between CR and the Ministry of Justice, access to information campaign we're going to see in Argentina case, granting legal identity to those whose mobility is constrained, like Brazil, legal clinic, digitalization, the CRBS and justice sector, and other documentation or supports for those who are from the marginalized community, like the case of Pakistan. So now, without further ado, I would love to hand over to the country office colleagues to hear from their experiences, but I'm going to hand over to Lara for facilitating. Over.
Thank you so much, both of you, Revai and Risa, for introduction and laying the ground. For those who are not that familiar to Legal ID, it was very helpful to start laying the ground. I think what is really of interest now is to look at what is happening at country level, what are the entry points, what are the challenges, specific challenges of the context that you're trying to address with different type of programming efforts. We know already it's going to be very interesting to see the variety of entry points and ways to go about this, and obviously learn from each other. So I'm going to start by giving the floor to Salman Asif, because it's very late in Pakistan and we want to let him go as soon as possible. So colleagues who are online and have questions for him, please do as soon as possible so that he can lead the seminar earlier. So Salman is our human rights and social protection expert in UNDP Pakistan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lara. Thank you very much, Risa, and all the colleagues. I'm truly honored to be part of this very august gathering of experts. I'm going to talk about rights of persons with non-binary gender identities in Pakistan. But let me just take half a minute to give you the context. The transgender, intersex, or persons with non-binary gender identities have existed in the South Asian countries and in the Indian subcontinent. The Indian subcontinent comprises of Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. From times immemorial, there are temples dedicated to them, and they have been recognized as an integral part of the society, historically not only respected, but also valued. Very, very ubiquitous community, and they live as communities, even in contemporaneous times, in family functions or societal celebrations. You will not have a celebration considered to be complete unless you have groups of transgender persons dressed up and decked up and performing music and dance and giving blessings. Historically, transgender persons and persons with non-binary gender identities in the South Asian history and society, there have been poets, artists, writers, politicians, even army generals. They've held high positions in the royal courts. Fast forward to the 19th century, and South Asia goes through its part of coloniality, its part of colonialism. And we have the new colonizer, the new colonial masters who arrive, and they look at the society from their own perspective, and they have their own observations, and they try to figure out what the society is all about. People going to mosques, people going to temples, people half dressed up, transgender persons so ubiquitously everywhere. They find the transgender persons not only weird, but scary. And not only scary, but potentially suspicious. And not only suspicious, but almost dangerous to the Victorian morality or the Victorian standards of ethics. So in 1864, we receive an act called Criminal Tribes Act. And the Criminal Tribes Act completely disenfranchises persons with non-binary gender identities, transgender persons, intersex persons, cross-dressers, persons who have sex, men who have sex with men. So the LGBTIQ spectrum, if you like, it comes not only under surveillance, but it comes under untold, unprecedented, and extremely brutal censoriousness, to an extent that their identities were taken away. They weren't allowed to travel from one village to another or from one city to the other. and there was a state apparatus appointed to constantly keep them under the spotlight, as if they had some kind of paranormal powers to avert the colonial rule. In Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, our current law is an aftermath of the Raj law. It continues to follow the 1864 law, although in India, they have made many, many changes in favor of gender diversity and gender expression, homosexuality, and giving equal rights to LGBTI plus community. Such is not the case in Pakistan. So in the past 75 years of the independence or the existence of Pakistan, what has happened is that although the transgender persons remain very ubiquitous by virtue of the way they dress up, by virtue of the day of their prominent presence everywhere around, but without rights and without legal identities. So those children who are born with nondescript genitalia, they are immediately abandoned by parents. So they obviously have no, if you like, the registration or the birth registration because of the profound stigma attached to intersex persons. But then there are those individuals who are born as biological females or biological males, and they go through transition, hazarding the risk of further stigma, braving and weathering the perils of new gender identity, which is completely disenfranchised, dispossessed, and disadvantaged. So, but they go through transition. And as they go through transition, even though they may have had registration and legal identities as biological men or biological women, but it has been next to impossible to change your school credentials, for example, your degrees, for example, to factor in your new gender identity. With the result, transgender persons classically have not had access not only to legal registration, but also to assets, to property, to inheritance, even to be able to open up a bank account, even to be able to buy a telephone SIM card, even to be able to have a passport or a driving license. That is the backdrop with which we started to work with them. So in 2017, I led a nationwide project of undertaking a perception survey with a sample of over 1,000 individuals from across Pakistan. It was a two-pronged baseline or a perception survey. It was perception of transgender persons and persons with non-binary gender identities, persons who find themselves within the larger LGBTIQ plus spectrum, their perception about services, about policy, about legislation, about the question of registration, about social protection, access to social security, safety nets, access to justice, rule of law, access to health, education. And the other part of the perception survey was with the cisgender individuals, men and women from across the country, what was their perception towards persons with non-binary gender identities and those within the larger spectrum or umbrella of LGBTIQ plus communities. This included judges, this included decision makers, this included men and women, members of general public, law enforcers and decision makers. 100% of the key population persons, that is the LGBTIQ persons in Pakistan, experience stigma, discrimination, ostracism, extreme forms of sexual and gender-based violence, lack of legal and social protections. And worryingly, spiking trends of transgender persons' homicides. I'll come to the statistics in a moment. And they all identify.
Salman, I'm sorry to, very sorry to interrupt this super interesting presentation, but you're already over your 10 minutes. So I really need, yes, so I really need to ask
just 3
you
more minutes.
to, yeah, please, thank you so much.
So they identified lack of legal identity as the key driver of these vulnerabilities and violations. We don't need to go through the slides now. If you just allow me 3 to 4 minutes, I'll wrap it up. And colleagues can have a look at the slides. So in 2018, in 2017, we started a project on legal identity for transgender persons with money coming from the regional headquarters of UNDP, 100,000 USD. We engaged human rights institutions, judiciary, but most importantly, the transgender persons themselves, and did consultations across the country, engaged constitutional lawyers to form the first transgender persons protection act. In 1 year's time, on 18th of May, year 2018, the law was passed that granted legal identity to all transgender persons in Pakistan. But that has also led to a number of other provisions. And you would see in my presentation that the 4 provinces of Pakistan have created social protection policies, provisions, centers for persons with non-binary gender identities. This journey has not been without challenges. There has been a huge backlash 4 years after the passage of this law providing legal identity to transgender persons. The law, the legislation was challenged in the Sharia court or the Islamic court. It stands suspended now. There are appeals against it from the Federal Ministry of Human Rights, from the National Commission for Human Rights, from the transgender persons' own rights organizations. But it has created, if you like, a transgender person spring in Pakistan, unprecedented. They have contested elections in 2018 elections. They have contested elections as recently as 8th of February this year. We have now politicians, transgender politicians. You find them in the corridors of power. We have now very high-profile NGOs run by transgender persons. So it is voice, visibility, and agency of transgender persons being claimed by themselves. The journey is not without perils. It's not without challenges and hazards. But as I said, we are witnessing a transgender person spring in claiming their registration and legal identity rights. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sam, for this very interesting presentation. And it's so good to hear that UNDP is supporting this very important movement in Pakistan. And colleagues, we will share the PowerPoint presentation in the chat, and feel free to reach out to Salman. And if you have questions for him, don't forget to do them now. And apologies, we really have to move on because we have a lot of other presentations. I'm now giving the floor to Alexander Vaz, Technical Coordinator. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. Now we are listening to Karina Carpintero from UNDP Brazil, Program Analyst. Sorry, Karina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lara, and regional the organizers. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to share today our experience at the country level. The first thing we want to share is a little bit of our national context. So just since the approval of the 2030 agenda, the country actually start doing a great effort to adapt the non-existent indicator on access to justice at the moment it was approved. And since then, the first action to take was to include a national measurement of unmet legal needs. Since then, there were specific questions on documentation and access to legal identity in terms of cards and all the connections interlinked with other personal procedures, administrative needs, or different rights. Since then, luckily, all the institutional capacity has been growing, and in 2021, the country actually included as a prioritization SDG 16.9 on legal identity. Since then, we don't have a specific more progress, but it was included, which was heavily recognized and celebrated at the national level. The last aspect is actually the recently approved indicator on SDG 16.3.3. And the idea with this presentation today is to at least share three main aspects at the country level. The first is on national measurements, what data is telling us on these interlinkages the webinar is trying to put on the table today. Second, what is a little bit of a reflection on legal capacity and the possibility of the internet interconnections between those fields. And the third point will be on this country experience on a legal empowerment campaign. So the first thing is on data. In all these three measurements that you see in this first page, maybe if you can pass to the next slide, what you identify is that access to justice show that all the group of problems associated with legal documentation or personal documentation, it's always on the 25th or 12th most important problems a person will experience. However, this problem is not seen as a serious problem by people. So when they are at least in these three experiences we have since 2016, 2019, and 2023, is not identified as serious. So how can we understand that data on access to justice regarding this other agenda? Is that evidently people can navigate the different relations of states without ID. Is that the thing? Of course it's not, but for some reason or another, people believe we have a lot of information of what people is deprived, right, of doing. If you can pass to the next slide. So the first thing on specific data is that the prevalence of the problem is 32.3%, which is really high. But when you ask persons about how serious was that problem in their life, it's not considered as one. It's predominant also how people would go to solve that problem to a formal mechanism, which is, it may sound obvious, but it's not. At least in Argentina, we have a lot of institutional development for rural communities, and also, of course, in a lower scale to indigenous community, that is merge the formal and informal mechanisms that would reach the territory. However, people actually find that more structured, organized, and would provide more confidence and trust that the issue will be solved. But I think a lot of more awareness of what an ID could give you to life, as Ribai and also Salman, you have also informed, is not maybe at least underestimated. So we have this experience at the country level when we test the SDG 16.3.3. It was a really good experience because we tried to also understand how legal problems were categorized. And so we tried to produce a typology of problems, if they were structured, which were the parties, which were the institutional mechanisms, which were the rights involved. And then you see, and we can discuss further in any other session, that all the issues connected with legal documentation are the more structured ones, are social rights, are social problems, and are always problems related with the administration, right? It may sound obvious, but then the thing that I was mentioning before, that people won't find that as a serious problem. It's also a great barrier, and it's a barrier of legal capacity. So I wanted to show here that in the module we produced, here is the question. It's in Spanish, and I'm sorry for that we don't have it in English yet. It's issues involve personal procedures in their relations with states. So we have disability, residency, impositive or fiscal issues, and of course the ID, which is a bit tricky because all of those 4 examples that are mentioned there needs an ID to be solved. So we certainly believe that the measurement and access to justice can inform how is people experiencing their relation with justice in connection with legal identity. It's maybe marginal information we can at this point for at least for this presentation, but it has a lot of richness to go deeper and to analyze better and maybe to improve other techniques to understand more in a more qualitative way, which is their experience and their vision on how to relate with states and how to relate with justice issues, starting for their ID. Here is just the frequency of problems. So we see that 88% of people actually, when you see the percentage of access in Argentina after measuring this indicator was 61.3% of access to justice, from not considering the ones that not access, just the one that did access. So it was a 61%, from which an 8% was related to issues that would involve ID. We want to show this because it may be a little bit invisible, maybe if you read the report, but we can actually make these interlinkages work actively and have already information that can inform our decision makers, the people that we serve from UNDP, to produce a little more, not only awareness, but taking action. This was really important for us, for instance, in a project we have with the Ministry of Justice and Human Rights at the penitentiary level in the province of Buenos Aires, that it has like 54,000 people detained and more than 58 penitentiary units, in which they developed from an access to justice perspective and an action to facilitate the provision of ID to people that were deprived of their liberty in this context. And after reading our report and seeing the connections, and they actually start measuring that impact and developing an access to justice action in their project from a perspective of legal identity. We're working on that, and we hope to share more progress and outcomes soon, but it was important to maybe see the specific connection. Thanks, Risa, for the advice. I just want to share a concrete example of putting the dots together from legal capacity aspect in action, which was a campaign that our project developed in 2020. It were 10 days of actions in which after 1 month of delivering information, working with the Ministry of Justice, working with the Minister of Interior, but also with the Social Development Ministry. They were all together to develop this campaign that you can see in the presentation. It was my first document, Access to Human Rights. There were, after these 10 days of work, more than 1,900 people access to their ID. It was really effective delivered through WhatsApp. WhatsApp as an instrument here, that, as you know, it can work without data, without having a more financial resources. It helped a lot of people that they didn't have maybe connection to Wi-Fi, but they were able to access to the service. So it was really a really important tool to work with. If you can see it, maybe in the next slide, Risa, please. It was really well structured from a legal empowerment vision. We had to disseminate community outreach, working through WhatsApp, working, which was important in Argentina, that we have a federal network of access to justice center. At that moment, we're 100 centers of access to justice in the field. working with communities, working with all the administrative, public administration at the provincial level as well. And the outcomes that you can see in the next slide were really satisfactory for a really short intervention, which it was based on access to justice and legal empowerment. The need to work legal capacity and put on the center the need to recognition that and I mentioned a social problem may be seen as only for that dimension has legal implications. And maybe for many of us that may sound obvious, but it still is a challenge for UNDP and for the access to justice agenda. And we, with this experience, we also detect that. This is also a current issue in the unmet legal needs service, and in our report, we conducted an exploratory exercise on legal capacity, but there's a lot to do right now on how we understand those data and how we understand how legal capacity is playing still an important role on that. So it's just the final reflections here on how we can maximize the impact on working these two SDGs together, and maybe also moving forward on how can we shape justice policies working in a more coordinately way. So thank you so much for the invitation, and hope to have some feedback and answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. And we realize that 10-minute exercise is a very challenging one for these rich presentations. And thank you so much for joining and sharing Argentina. Because we are really tight on time, I'm going to immediately give the floor to Alexander Vaz, and he's going to talk us through the experience in Brazil. The floor is yours, Alexander, and please try to stick to your 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Riza, for kindness. I'd like to express my gratitude for the invitation and the opportunity to share our experience on this important issue regarding the legal identification documentation of individuals. Well, Brazilian society is characterized by a stratified range of social inequality. The lack of access to proper identification documentation prevents individuals to fully exercise their citizenship, mostly when it comes to access to basic public goods and services. And this situation seems to worsen even further when considering specific groups such as the prison populations, which are the focus of our project here in Brazil. Next, please. The prison population in Brazil has been growing steadily for the last 2 decades, ranging from about 230,000 individuals in the year 2000 to a peak of more than 750,000 individuals in the year 2019. This has caused a situation of not only prison overcrowding, but also the conditions of occupancy of these units have been subject to discussion by the highest national judicial court of Brazil, the so-called Supreme Federal Court, STF. Due to the degrading conditions found in national prison units, has judged and formally classified the situation as a true unconstitutional state of affairs. One of the elements that make up this unconstitutional state of affairs lies precisely in the lack of correct date identification and documentation of those individuals deprived of liberty. The lack of proper documentation affects around 40% of the total prison population in Brazil. In the country, for instance, it's not uncommon for individuals to be detained and imprisoned by no more than a photo recognition and consider their correct identification. Next, please. In face of this situation, in 2019, the National Council of Justice defined its Resolution 306, in which it asserts the need of guaranteeing correct identification and documentation for the prison population, particularly through the collection of individuals' biometric data. Next, please. The entire project was guided by a central concern to ensure that for each biometric set of individuals, only one set of biographic data was included and associated to that specific individual. To make sure of that, in a partnership with UNDP, it was carried out an international purchase of 5,400 biometric identification kits based on technical specification from institutional partners of the project, especially the Federal Police and the Superior Electoral Court. These kits follow international collection and quality standards and patterns for this collection. Next one, please. These kits were strategically allocated in two main public instances. Firstly, in the so-called custody hearings, which in Brazil are the judicial hearings to which those arrested by security force are subjected within 24 hours of their detention. If the detention is maintained by the judge, the biometric and biographical data of the individual are collected. This ensures that each individual entering the prison system does so with their biographic and biometric data fully collected and registered. The second instance of this strategy was to equip the executive power to perform the same process, the same collection directly in the prison units of the country. With this dual operation, we make sure that all new individuals entering the prison system, as well as all those individuals that were already in the prison system, have their data fully collected and registered in a national unified identification database, designed specifically for civil purpose for the issuance of legal documentation, but not for criminal purposes. Today, it's important to say we have in Brazil different databases structured by different institutions with different patterns of collection and registration. This project aims at overcoming the situation of informational chaos and inefficiency, in which a same person in Brazil may have 27 different personal IDs, each one for a different federative unit in the country. This means that, based on this unified national dataset, it should be possible not only to issue documentation for this population, including the prison population, but it also means that there's plenty of certainty that this documentation is authentic. Once it has been certified by gathering information from legal federal national institutions, such as the Federal Police, the Federal Revenue Service, the Superior Electoral Court, and the State Identification Institution. We usually make the same information from all these institutions to get this unified database. Next one, please. The implementation of this cooperation took place between the years 2020 and 2023, considering the period and all the restrictions imposed by the COVID pandemic. But the project is already operating in all 27 federative units, and today more than 180,000 documents have been issued since the beginning of its implementation, specifically for the prison population. We make sure to monitor progress in each of one of these units, such as, for example, here, the state of Roraima, one of the 27 federative units of Brazil, where we have already reached almost 100% of the collection of identification in the prison units. Next one. Or even in São Paulo, the largest and most populous federative unit of the country, where the project also operates and is monitored both by the judiciary and the executive powers. Well, this is our experience here in Brazil in a glance. Naturally, in a short time, it's hard to express all the challenges and obstacles encountered in implementation and operation of this huge initiative. However, it's worth mentioning that results are emerging according to the planning and the main focus on guaranteeing the citizenship of the prison population. Once again, I express my gratitude for the opportunity to speak and the formal invitation to join this event. I hope I have respected 10 minutes and really appreciate the invitation. Thank you a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You were really perfect with the time. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you will have also a lot of questions about about the technical tools that you presented with very impressive results in Brazil. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope we have time to get back to it during the conversation after the presentations. We are now going to give the floor to Aimé Robert-Riringar. He is a program specialist in Côte d'Ivoire and is going to talk to us about the situation that they're trying to address over there. Aimé, are you with us and ready?
Okay, thank you, Lara, very much. Thank you, Lara, for the opportunity you have given us to talk about the Ivorian experience in promoting the right to identity and access to justice in the north of the country. Please accept my limit in English, colleagues. And my presentation will be structured around 5 points. One is the context. Second is situation. Third is the methodological approach. Fourth in process, and the 5 is the links to promote identity and access justice. In the context, on the context, I should be noted that the north of Côte d'Ivoire is an area of great fragility, linked to several historical, political, security, and socio-economic factors over the past 10 years. But I am not going to go back over the unfortunate past events that left their mark on this country and particularly on the north. And the first element is geographic. The Ivory Coast have a long border with countries in Mali and Burkina Faso, which have been subject to repeat attacks by extremist groups in recent years, with harmful consequences such as the massive displacement of population to Côte d'Ivoire. Currently, more than 51,000 people are registered in the north of Côte d'Ivoire, particularly in Bunkani and Chologo. The second element of context is political, social, and economic. It is important to note that the weakness or lacks of basic social infrastructure and public service, which weakness to the smooth running of society and contribute to feeding a space exposed to all kinds of manipulation. It also increased social injustice because this population do not have the same opportunity as others to benefit from state services such as health, education, justice, employment, or economic opportunity, and security in some cases. It should be noted, however, that since 2021, the state has set up a second phase program social focus primarily on the north to restore balance and social justice. Third element in the security because a recurrent conflict between security forces and community, particularly young people, because major young people have not a administrative document. What is the situation in north of Côte d'Ivoire? Globally in Côte d'Ivoire, 35% of population have not a administrative document. In north, for 10%, 8% have not a one document administrative. For 10%, for 10 security control, 7 is concerned the absence of document. For 10 security control in the border village concern the administrative document, and for all region of North, there is a single counter of the registry office, ONEC. ONEC have one office in the all North region. The village are more longer for the office of sous-prefecture or communal because ONEC have not all office in the country. The measure of conflict between security forces and community are caused by the failure to identify individual by means of an administrative act. 90% of people of this community do not have access to justice because they do not have administrative document. On this context, UNDP Côte d'Ivoire should be noted that is a bottom-up approach oriented towards human rights and gender. Thus, to find solutions, UNDP in collaboration with local authority organized several socio-security dialogues between the force security and community to improve security and strengthen the protection of citizens' rights in this region. During this dialogue, the issue of identity document was often raised as one of the key factors in conflict between the security forces and community, particularly young people. In close collaboration with the local authority, as discussion has been initiated with Ministry of the Interior and Justice to define the contours and possibility. Then it was decided to analyze the possibility and the modus operandi with ONEC, which made it possible to implement each of this process. The process is carried out by 3 actors, including the National Office of Civil Statute and Identification, ONEC, as the main and operational body, with the mandate of the management of civil statute and identification. ONEC is supported by the Ministry of the Interior through the sub-prefecture at town halls, which oversight registration, seeing of document and distribution. In some cases where the applicant situation does not comply with the required conditionality or the law, ONEC call on the court to examine and draw up supplementary judgment to allow the identification of the person. It is around these 3 actors that the process in conduct on the issuance of administrative document for the benefit of people whose birth has not been registered at birth because of a special law adopted by the government. Next step. Currently, 1,600 people, majority are young people and women, have been enrolled by ONEC service with the support of the administrative and judicial authority in the 8 village of the 4 sub-prefecture in the 2 pilot region. This person holding identity document can now and for the future exercise their right attached to this document, but also have access to justice like any other citizen. Next slide, please. And the right linked to administrative document is the citizen, nationality, related constitutional right, including right to justice, right to vote, access to socio-economic opportunity, and other. But the link and identity and justice and access to justice is reduction of social injustice through access to the opportunity available in the country government social program, facilitating access to judicial and administrative service, specifically to have one voice heard or to claim on rights, such as requesting a criminal record or loading a complaint, obtaining other document, vehicle registration document, driving license, etc. Thank you very much for your attention. And sorry for my English.
That's great. Your English was perfect, Amy. Thank you so much for this presentation, and interesting to see that depending on the context, the problems deriving from lack of ID can be very different. Like in Côte d'Ivoire, where it really impacts the security of people directly. So thanks for sharing. I'm going now to give the floor to Victor Pereira from Guinea-Bissau, Head of Exploration. The floor is yours to tell us about the experience in Bissau.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura and Riza. I will focus presentation from Guinea-Bissau, more close to the data analysis and exploration, right? I'm Vitor Pereira, as presented, Head of Exploration from Accelerator Lab. I suppose that everybody heard about Accelerator Lab, and just going to do a quick introduction about this. Okay, Accelerator Lab is an initiative from UNDP. The objective is to support countries to improve and to accelerate the process to achieve SDG goals, right? And then is available in 150 countries all around the world. And Guinea-Bissau benefits for this second cohort from the Accelerator Lab initiative. Next slide. So just to try to let people know where is Guinea-Bissau is. Guinea-Bissau is located in the west coast of Africa. Sometimes people make confusion. Guinea-Bissau is a small country between Senegal and other Guinea, Guinea-Conakry. It's good to clarify because sometimes it's a little bit confused. So Guinea-Bissau benefits from this. Each country who benefits from Accelerator Lab must have a frontier challenge. And our frontier challenge is to improve the public service in the country generally, right? But we work directly with Ministry of Justice on this process because, as you know, UNDP have a strong presence in Guinea-Bissau in justice sector, and then they oriented us to work directly in the Minister of Justice because we have a lot of projects inside the Minister of Justice, right? Next slide. So Accelerator Lab work in this cycle. We call this learning cycle. First, we start to sense, to understand what's going on, right? We explore, we must have evidence, data to prove that the problem is this. And then we try to find a solution. And the good thing from lab, we test. We test the solution to see if the solution fits for our specific problem. If it's work, we can do the scale up and then to grow, right? This is the sixth cycle. If it doesn't work, we test, we see that this solution is not fit our problem, we can go back and start again. This itinerary, we can interactively find another solution, right? So when we arrive the Minister of Justice, we start to work with civil registry direction, Department of Civil Registry, we start to understand the information system, how the information flow between different services in the Ministry of Justice. We do this mapping just to understand what's going on, where we are, and we realize that we have a lot of partners inside the ministry. Everybody try to support legal identity, party registration specifically. We have UNICEF, we have WHO, we have UNEC, cannot put it, but we have also. And we realize that in terms of availability of data, we have data at the district level. And in the register book, you find all the data for Guinea-Bissau, but this information did not come to the center level in the Minister of Justice. This means that one simple question I remember we made to the director from Civil Register, how many children you registered last year? Nobody knows. And we realized that even at the district level, they produce a lot of information. They register many children, but if you ask the director from each district how many children you expect it to have and where you are in terms of indicators, nobody knows. So we start to work to improve this. If we go to UNICEF or UNDP, it's easily to get information, more information about the country than even our ministry. The idea now is to connect, to put this information here in the Department of IT and Statistics of Justice. This is our challenge. And then we see that there is a lot of information also in the courts, in the Center of Access to Justice, but it must connect to the ministry to let them know their information, right? what we do in the accelerator lab is to test. We design the test. To design the test, we use the theory of if, then, else. If we collect the data and we digitalize, we will have opportunity to produce statistics and let the ministry have evidence and to take a good decision based on data. This is our purpose for this time we work inside the Ministry of Justice related to the civil regime. And then we produced our first vital statistic, our first CRVS for Guinea-Bissau is validated last 2 weeks ago. And then we are is under revision for the scientific committee, and then National Institute for Statistics will publish for everybody, include UN and UNEC. So I will focus my presentation strongly in this birth registration, since we are talking about the legal identity. This is our first step for legal identity, right? And then in terms of number, it's important to minister to have a notion how many registers they make each year. We do this time saver based on the data we collect from the register book. We realize that Guinea-Bissau produce each year around 52,000 registers for each year. This is their capacity they have to produce the legal identity by each year. And then we realize that 2021 is kind of outlier, and we try to understand why every year is around the same thing, and then we have this unexpected data. And we have an explanation. It's a strong intervention made by Plan International. They go to the field and they do the massive campaign to register in the two regions. And then we realized that in 2020, because of COVID, we decreased the number of register is normal. In each data we made in the vital statistic, we see that in 2020, the data dropped. And then we talk about why this number is too high in 2021. If you realize this yellow is mean 2021. This means that they work strongly in two big regions, Gabu and Bafata. This is why the number is increased. So, and in terms of, because we focus in the life birth also from Minister of Health, because this is not data from health. This is for it's not for the justice. This is for health. We realize that in terms of life birth in hospitals, we have around 30,000 children born in this hospital. Next slide, please. Wow, time is gone. Okay, just to show this slide to say that according to the projection, we're supposed to have around 60,000 children born in Guinea-Bissau, but only half % of these children are born in hospital. And then we register only 50% of these children who born in hospital. The idea is to increase this number, to register children right now in hospital when they get born. This is that regional presentation. I have no time to, maybe next slide, because it's principal. This 45%, this is the real indicator for what we're looking for in terms of facility. We talk about proportion of children under 5 years who get birth, have been birth registered with the civil authority. In Guinea-Bissau, this indicator is 45%. We are far from the target. The target is no leaving no one behind, right? And then we lose opportunity. This means that 0.5% of Guineans don't have documentation, legal identity, right? And next slide, please. I don't know if this is when we disaggregate for the region, we understand that we have a serious problem in the capital, Bissau, and closer region to the Bissau. This is to allow the Minister of Justice to start to think about We made a lot of intervention outside Bissau, is good, but don't forget the capital center because we still have problem in the capital center. So in terms of disaggregation, because what we do is to do analysis by time, place, and person to understand better what's going on in terms of civil register. We understand for this graphic, when we talk about age group, we still register a lot of people more than 18 years, adults. So when we go to the field, we realize that we want to register the children, but the parents of these children don't have the legal identity. This is a big issue in the country. And then we realize that we're supposed to register children under 1 year more than the other age group, but we have a small numbers. And another thing, when we talk about the gender, we expected that we have more men than women to have the legal identity, but it's not very evident. It's around 52% of men and 48% of women. The difference is around 2%. It depends on the region, but it's not evident that we register more men than women. Next slide, please. So we tested some solution. One of solution is mobile justice. The idea is to put inside the mobile justice civil registry and the center of access to justice. This is what it was a very interesting test. We test if you made the civil register available in the community and made the center of access to justice in the community, this number will increase. This is what happened. We can change it. Next slide, please. Next. And next again. This is just the test. I don't have to explain. This is the number we realize in terms of legal identity when we go using this van to give access to population. This number is 1,656 for the civil register and 1,315 for access to justice. Next slide. In terms of comparison between mobile justice and the fixed point, we realize that mobile justice is more efficient than the fixed point because people who use the justice service in the big cities is just the people who live in less than 5 kilometers for this location. But when you use the mobile justice, we go directly to population, this number is increased. For each day, we realize only in one van, we realize 65 civil registers, right? And then related to the cash, this number is 2 in the fixed term and 488 in the mobile justice, right? This number is difference is very high, and this evidence that you go to the community is better than the stay and the fixed point to wait to the community to come, because some people don't want to come to make the register. Next slide. So this is the digitalization we have been done in Minister of Justice with successful. We already registered 132,000 registered. And next slide, please. And then for the next step, we want to continue to do the digitalization because it's a reality in Guinea-Bissau. We are doing it, and computerization to have digital ID. And then the continuation with mobile justice, including the other service from Minister of Justice, and connection between birth registration and vaccination program. This one, I think, will be very interesting in the country because vaccination program have a coverage from 90% and the civil register is 45. It's out, right? And another important thing is still continue to use the data to make the Minister of Justice more efficient and to know where we are as a country and where we want to go. It's important to us to know the identification is key for the country, and we need to register everybody in the country. We are at 45%. What you can do to reach until 2030, 100%. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me finalize this presentation. Obrigado.
Obrigada, Victor. Thank you so much, everyone. And we managed to finish all the presentations. We have 5 minutes to take up any questions. I think it was personally think it was a very interesting variety of experiences that I think leave no doubt on the importance of legal identity, not only as a right to identity, but legal capacity and all the access to everything that can be prevented when we don't have ID, from a SIM card to access to a vaccination program. So I think, do we have questions? We have one question. Please, Derek, jump in.
Thank you very much. It's not a question. I just wanted to add what Salman Asif has actually mentioned regarding Pakistan, because I was chairman National Database and Registration Authority from 2021 to 2023. And, we carried forward access to justice program and did some real interventions where we ensured that nobody is left behind. And so I just wanted to mention that we achieved over 90% of coverage of providing the legal ID to everybody. But, the real transformation was to set up a public engagement department and find out what are the marginalized communities and where they are. Transgender was one, and Pakistan became the first country which actually recognized, first Muslim country, the third gender. And we, created rules and regulation that, okay, third gender would be recorded as marked as X, just like male for M, and males are recorded as M and female as F. We have X also. We also did another intervention. We digitalized succession and property distribution process. And that has resulted reduction of 30% of caseloads on courts. And that made 40% of women as the property owner. So that is a digital dividend of digital identity. Other than that, more than 500,000, I think, 555,000 special persons with different disabilities were registered, and 5 million minorities were registered, so on and so forth. And it is very important to record those facts also, because they can represent the real transformation if you provide legal identity to all. Although we focused on adult registration, but there is a lot to be done to provide, to ensure that children are also registered properly in Pakistan. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tariq. And indeed, we also understand that if children can be registered at birth, it's really easier than to try to resolve the situation afterwards, where sometimes interventions of courts are needed, which makes it even more complicated. And we heard a lot of different things that you do in programming, including supporting sometimes some legislative or policy changes that can help improve the situation. What I found very interesting is that the way you all work with data collection, with starting from perception surveys or the access to justice survey in Argentina, or community dialogues in the Ivory Coast, and the very interesting work also that you do with the accelerator lab in Guinea-Bissau are very, very interesting, so that can really monitor and come closer to the needs and adjust really the interventions to the specific needs or to the specific groups that are the most in need. So I really want to highlight that, and maybe this is an area where we can follow up. We have one more question. Okay, let's go. Please present yourself. Last question, I'm afraid, because you're.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kadi from Sierra Leone, and I quite enjoyed almost all the presentations. Risa, good to see your face. My question is to my colleague from Cote d'Ivoire, and I think other colleagues too, because a lot of this piece of work is not just done by UNDP, but with other sister agencies in collaboration. So, for example, when he was talking about the birth registration and other things, what we did here in Sierra Leone was work with UNICEF, and we also had some work with other partners. So I was wondering, what was the linkage? Was it UNDP that led that process, or was it also co-led by other sister agencies? It's just to see the collaboration and how we ensure our work is integrated at a UNCT point of view. Okay.
Any colleagues want to discuss the collaboration? Emil, you want to come in if you're still with us?
Thank you very much for this colleague. Yes, the process to conduct for UNDP is different for the process in conduct for UNICEF, because the UNDP process concern the people have not a birth certificate. The objective is to facilitate to deliver the administrative document for a young people and women to reduce a conflict of security force and the community. But I shared the information with UNICEF because UNICEF is focused to children. The process concerns the children, and UNDP, the process of UNDP concerns the young people of women. But I carried the information and this agency because UNDP and UNICEF, the approach concern the resilience program of North in Cote d'Ivoire to facilitate the deliverance of administrative document for UNICEF to children, for UNDP to young people and women. Is it okay?
Thank you. Thank you. And colleagues, I think it's time to close this webinar. And thank you so much for staying until the end. Thank you very much to all our speakers for their presentations, and looking forward to continuing this conversation. We'll stay tuned. We will get back to you, I'm sure, with more propositions. Giving the final word to Risa. Thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for the rich presentation and fruitful discussion. Yeah, so we are going to touch upon other thematic areas like statelessness issues or CRBS business processing improvements, which also is relevant to the access to justice and then rule of law issues. So stay tuned for the further webinars upcoming, and then we will stay in touch around how to deepen our conversation around rule of law and then access legal identity linkage. So thank you so much for joining, and then have a wonderful rest of the week.